Uma mulher de 63 anos vive um casamento de 38 anos que se tornou vazio e sem afeto. Seu marido, Richard, a trata com indiferença, e ela se sente invisível na própria vida. Quando ele viaja a trabalho, uma vizinha a convida para aulas de arte, onde ela conhece Vincent, um instrutor de 47 anos que a faz sentir-se viva e valorizada pela primeira vez em décadas. O que começa como uma conexão emocional se transforma em um affair apaixonado. Margaret redescobre sua identidade, sua criatividade artística e a sensação de ser desejada. Mas a culpa a consome, especialmente quando Richard retorna inesperadamente e confessa que teve um caso de 2 anos que acabou, pedindo uma segunda chance para o casamento. Agora, Margaret está presa entre 2 mundos. Richard representa segurança, história familiar e o dever de honrar seus votos. Vincent representa paixão, reconhecimento e a possibilidade de viver autenticamente. Ambos os homens querem uma resposta. Seus filhos pensam que os pais estão se reconciliando. E ela precisa decidir se escolhe a estabilidade ou a paixão, a obrigação ou a felicidade pessoal, sabendo que qualquer escolha terá um custo devastador. A história termina sem resolução, com Margaret pedindo conselhos sobre qual caminho seguir aos 63 anos, quando finalmente descobriu o que é sentir-se viva novamente. Siga a mesma linha de raciocínio, mas altere nome e personagens e ambientações da história. True Story. At 63, I sat alone in silence. Then I felt everything come in all at once. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would do this. At 63 years old, after 38 years of marriage, 3 grown children, and a lifetime of doing the right thing, I found myself standing at a crossroads I never imagined existed. And the worst part? I don't know which path leads to happiness and which leads to complete destruction. Let me take you back to where it all started, because I need you to understand how a woman like me ended up here. My name is Catherine, and for most of my life, I've been invisible. Not physically, of course, but emotionally, spiritually, in every way that actually matters. I live in a comfortable home in suburban Portland, Oregon, with my husband, James. We raised our 3 children together, built a life that looked perfect from the outside, attended church on Sundays, hosted Thanksgiving dinners, celebrated anniversaries with polite dinners at nice restaurants. But somewhere along the way, between the mortgage payments and the college tuitions and the routine of everyday life, we stopped seeing each other. Or maybe James just stopped seeing me. I can pinpoint the exact moment I realized I had become a ghost in my own home. It was a Tuesday evening, about 6 months ago. James came home from his job at the accounting firm, walked right past me in the kitchen where I was preparing dinner, grabbed a beer from the refrigerage, and settled into his recliner without a single word. Not, hello, not, how was your day? Nothing, just silence. And that silence had become so normal that I almost didn't notice it anymore. Almost. That night, as I set his plate down in front of the television where he ate every single meal, I looked at this man I'd spent nearly 4 decades with and realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at me, touched me with affection, or said anything that made me feel like I was more than just the person who cooked his meals and did his laundry. Before you judge me for what I'm about to tell you, please understand that I tried. God knows I tried to fix things. I suggested counseling, and James laughed it off, saying we didn't need to pay someone to tell us what we already knew. I planned date nights that he canceled, or sat through in uncomfortable silence, checking his phone every 5 minutes. I bought new clothes, changed my hair, tried to initiate conversations about his work, his feelings, anything to create connection. But it was like trying to have a conversation with a wall. The man I married had checked out emotionally years ago, and I was left living with a stranger who happened to share my last name and my bed, though we hadn't been intimate in over 2 years. Then James announced he had to go to Chicago for 3 weeks for work. 3 weeks. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The house would be quiet, yes, but it was already quiet. At least without him there, I wouldn't have to feel the crushing weight of being ignored in real time. I wouldn't have to watch him choose the television over conversation with me every single evening. I could just exist without the constant reminder of my own invisibility. If you're listening to this and relating to any part of my story, please hit that subscribe button. I need to know I'm not alone in this, and I promise you, what happens next is something you won't want to miss. The day after James left for Chicago, my neighbor Eleanor knocked on my door. Eleanor is one of those women who seems to glow with life, even at 70. She's widowed, active in the community, always trying new things. She'd been taking art classes at the local community center and insisted I come with her. "Catherine," she said, grabbing my hands with genuine warmth, "you need to get out of this house. You need to do something for yourself. When was the last time you did anything just because it made you happy?" I couldn't answer her because I honestly couldn't remember. So I agreed, mostly because I had nothing else to do and the silence in my empty house was becoming deafening. The community center was a 10-minute drive, a cheerful building with colorful murals on the walls and the smell of paint and creativity in the air. The art class was in a bright studio on the second floor, easels arranged in a semicircle, afternoon light streaming through large windows. There were about 12 people there, mostly women over 50, chatting and laughing as they set up their supplies. And then I saw him, Marcus, the instructor. He was standing near the front of the room, organizing brushes and paint tubes, and when he looked up and smiled at the class, something inside my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in decades. He was 47, I would learn later, with silver threading through his dark hair, kind eyes that actually saw you when he looked at you, and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they loved. He wore paint-stained jeans and a simple gray shirt, and there was something about his presence that felt both calming and electric at the same time. "Welcome, everyone," he said, and his voice was warm, genuine, the kind of voice that made you feel like you mattered. "Today, we're going to work on landscape painting, but more importantly, we're going to work on seeing the world through new eyes. Art isn't about perfection. It's about expression, about letting yourself feel and create without judgment." I picked up a brush for the first time in probably 40 years, not since high school, and something strange happened. As I mixed colors on the palette, as I made tentative strokes on the canvas, I felt something wake up inside me. It wasn't just about the painting. It was about being in a space where I was encouraged to create, to express, to exist as something more than just someone's wife or someone's mother. For 2 hours, I was just Catherine, a woman with a brush in her hand and possibilities spreading out before her like the landscape taking shape on my canvas. Marcus walked around the room, offering gentle guidance, encouragement, actually looking at each person's work with genuine interest. When he stopped beside my easel, I felt my heart race in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. "This is beautiful," he said softly, studying my painting of mountains at sunset, colors I didn't even know I had inside me spilling onto the canvas. "You have a real eye for color, for emotion. Have you painted before?" "Not since I was a girl," I admitted. And when I looked up at him, he was looking at me, really looking at me, like I was someone worth seeing. Not through me, not past me, but directly at me, and I felt something crack open inside my chest. Please don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to share with you next changed everything. And I need you here with me for this journey. I started going to the art class twice a week. At first, I told myself it was just about the painting, about having something to do, about filling the empty hours while James was away. But I'd be lying if I said Marcus wasn't part of the draw. Every class, he would spend time at my easel, not just teaching me technique, but asking me questions. Real questions. About what I saw, what I felt, what inspired me. He asked about my life, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. I told him about my children, about my garden, about the books I loved to read, about dreams I'd had when I was young that I'd somehow forgotten along the way. "You're not just learning to paint," Marcus said to me one afternoon after class, when most of the other students had already left. "You're remembering who you are. I can see it happening. Every week you come in a little more alive." His words hit me like a physical touch. When was the last time James had noticed anything about me? When was the last time anyone had seen me as a person separate from my roles and responsibilities? I felt tears sting my eyes, and I tried to turn away, embarrassed, but Marcus gently touched my arm. Just a simple touch, his hand on my forearm, but it sent electricity through my entire body. "Hey," he said softly. "Whatever you're going through, whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone. Sometimes we all need someone to remind us that we're more than what life has tried to reduce us to." I should have pulled away. I should have thanked him politely and left. Instead, I started crying right there in that art studio, and Marcus pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home after being lost for decades. He didn't ask questions, didn't push for explanations. He just held me while I cried out years of loneliness and invisibility and quiet desperation. And when I finally pulled back, wiping my eyes and apologizing, he looked at me with such kindness that I felt something inside me shift permanently. "Don't apologize for feeling," he said. "That's the bravest thing any of us can do." After that day, something changed between us. It was subtle at first, an extra moment of eye contact, a hand on my shoulder that lingered just a beat too long, conversations that stretched beyond art and into deeper territory. Marcus told me about his divorce 5 years ago, about how he'd walked away from a corporate job that was killing his soul to pursue art full-time, about his 2 teenage daughters he shared custody with. He told me about loneliness, about the courage it takes to start over, about learning to value authenticity over comfort. And I found myself telling him everything, about the hollow shell my marriage had become, about feeling invisible, about waking up every morning wondering if this was really all there was going to be for the rest of my life. He listened like my words mattered, like I mattered, and for the first time in I don't know how long, I felt seen. If you're invested in this story, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next is the part I'm most afraid to tell you, and the part I most need to share. 3 weeks passed, and James came home from Chicago. I picked him up from the airport, and the first thing he said to me wasn't, "I missed you," or "It's good to be home." It was, "Did you remember to pick up my dry cleaning?" That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing had changed. Nothing was going to change unless I changed it. I kept going to the art classes. James didn't even notice my twice-weekly absences or ask what I was doing. He settled back into his routine like he'd never left, recliner and television and silence. Meanwhile, I was coming alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. My paintings were getting better, more confident, more expressive. Eleanor commented on how different I seemed, how there was light in my eyes again. But it wasn't just the art, it was Marcus. One evening, after a particularly intense class where we'd worked on abstract expressionism, pouring emotion onto canvas with bold strokes and vivid colors, Marcus asked if I wanted to grab coffee. Just coffee. Just 2 people who'd become friends talking about art and life. I said yes without hesitation, without even thinking about whether I should. We went to a small cafe near the community center, sat in a corner booth, and talked for 3 hours. About everything and nothing. About the books we loved, the places we wanted to travel, the small moments of beauty we noticed in everyday life. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years, deep, genuine laughter that came from joy rather than politeness. When he walked me to my car, the October air crisp and cool, he took my hand. Just held it for a moment, his fingers intertwined with mine, and looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I know this is complicated. I know you're married. But I need you to know that spending time with you is the best part of my week. You're extraordinary, and I hope someone in your life is telling you that regularly, but if they're not, I want to. I should have pulled my hand away. I should have reminded him that I was a married woman, that this was inappropriate, that we needed boundaries. Instead, I squeezed his hand back and heard myself say, "You're the only person who makes me feel like I exist." The next week, coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long drives where we'd park somewhere overlooking the Columbia River and talk until the stars came out. And then one night, in his car with rain pattering on the windshield and the city lights blurring in the distance, Marcus kissed me, and I kissed him back. And for the first time in decades, I felt alive in every cell of my body. I felt desired, cherished, seen in a way that made me remember I was still a woman with needs and wants and the capacity for passion. Please subscribe if you're still with me, because I need to know you're here, that you understand how a woman gets to a point where she does something she never thought she'd do. What started as one kiss became something more. I'm not going to give you explicit details, because that's not what this is about. This is about the fact that at 63 years old, I discovered that I wasn't dead inside after all. Marcus made me feel beautiful, desired, valued in ways my husband hadn't in so many years I'd lost count. When I was with Marcus, I wasn't just James's wife or my children's mother. I was Catherine, a woman who liked art and literature and long conversations about philosophy. I was someone whose opinions mattered, whose dreams were worth discussing, whose body was still capable of feeling pleasure and connection. The guilt was crushing. Every time I came home from being with Marcus, I would look at James sitting in his recliner, completely unaware that his wife had just spent hours in another man's arms, and I would feel like the worst person in the world. But then James would ask me what was for dinner without even looking up from his phone, and that guilt would transform into something else. Anger, resentment, the feeling that I'd given 38 years to a man who couldn't even be bothered to ask how my day was. I kept telling myself I would end it with Marcus. I kept planning the conversation where I would explain that it had been wonderful, but it couldn't continue, that I'd made vows I needed to honor. But then I'd see him, and he'd look at me like I hung the moon, and I'd ask myself why I should give up the one thing in my life that made me feel human again. This went on for 2 months. 2 months of living a double life, of feeling more alive and more guilty than I'd ever felt simultaneously. My art was flourishing. I was painting almost every day, creating pieces that expressed emotions I didn't even know I had. Eleanor said I looked 10 years younger. My daughter Emily commented during a phone call that I sounded different, happier, and asked if something good had happened. I told her I'd taken up painting again, which was true, just not the whole truth. And then everything exploded in a way I never saw coming. Stay with me because this is where it gets really complicated, and I desperately need your perspective on what happened next. James came home early from work one Tuesday afternoon. He never came home early. Never. I was in my bedroom, getting ready to meet Marcus at his studio, wearing a dress I'd bought specifically because Marcus had mentioned he loved the color blue on me. I was putting on earrings, actually feeling pretty for the first time in years, when I heard James's footsteps on the stairs. He knocked on our bedroom door, which was strange because it was his bedroom too. When I told him to come in, he entered with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in decades. He looked nervous, vulnerable, almost afraid. He stood there for a moment, just looking at me, and I felt my heart start to pound because something was very wrong. "Catherine," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "We need to talk. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react." I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands suddenly shaking. Was this it? Had he found out somehow about Marcus? Was my carefully constructed double life about to come crashing down? Part of me felt panic, but another part felt something almost like relief. Maybe it would all be out in the open, and I wouldn't have to carry this weight anymore. "I had an affair," James said, the words tumbling out quickly like he'd been rehearsing them. "It lasted 2 years. It ended 3 months ago. She was a colleague in the Chicago office. It's over now. completely over, and I am so sorry. I sat there in complete shock, unable to process what he'd just said. James had an affair? James, who barely seemed to notice I existed, had been having a 2-year relationship with another woman? The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Here, I'd been drowning in guilt over 2 months with Marcus, and my husband had been carrying on a 2-year affair. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Because I ended it," James said, sitting down next to me on the bed, careful not to touch me. "I ended it because I realized I was about to lose everything that actually matters. My marriage, you, our family. Catherine, I know I've been a terrible husband. I know I've taken you for granted and shut you out and treated you like you were just part of the furniture. But ending that affair made me see clearly for the first time in years. I don't want to lose you. I want us to start over. I want to try again. Really try this time. If you can believe what you're hearing, please subscribe, because I promise you, it gets even more complicated from here." I sat there listening to James pour his heart out, apologizing for years of neglect, explaining how his affair had started during a vulnerable time when he was struggling with getting older and feeling irrelevant. How it had been exciting at first, but ultimately empty, because it wasn't built on decades of history and partnership. He talked about our wedding day, about the birth of our children, about moments from our early marriage that I'd forgotten or thought he'd never cared about. He cried, actually cried, tears running down his face as he begged me for a second chance to be the husband I deserved. And all I could think about was Marcus. About the plans we'd been making, tentative and unspoken, but there nonetheless. About how he'd asked me just last week if I'd ever thought about what would happen if I left James, if we could have a real relationship instead of stolen moments. About how I'd started to imagine a life where I wasn't invisible, where I was cherished every single day. "I need time," I told James, my mind racing. "I need time to process this. You've had months to think about this decision. You ended your affair 3 months ago, which means you've had 3 months to prepare for this conversation. I need time." James nodded, looking both relieved that I hadn't thrown him out immediately and terrified that I might. He moved into the guest room that night, giving me space, and I called Marcus, told him I couldn't see him, that something had happened with James and I needed to figure things out. I could hear the hurt in Marcus's voice, the fear that I was choosing my marriage over him, but he said he understood, that he'd wait, that whenever I was ready to talk, he'd be there. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, my mind spinning in endless circles. On one hand, there was James, 38 years of history, 3 children who would be devastated if we divorced, financial security, social standing, the comfort of the familiar, even if that familiar had been slowly suffocating me. And now, apparently, a husband who was finally willing to fight for our marriage, who'd ended his own affair and wanted to recommit to our vows. On the other hand, there was Marcus. Passion I thought I'd never feel again. Someone who saw me, truly saw me, and valued what he saw. The possibility of living authentically, of being with someone who chose me every single day, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. But also the chaos of blowing up my entire life, the judgment I'd face from family and friends. Starting over at 63 with no guarantees that what Marcus and I had would last outside of our secret bubble. Subscribe now if you want to know what I decided, because I'm about to tell you something that might shock you. The thing is, I haven't decided. Not really. Not completely. And that's why I'm here, telling you this story. Because I desperately need perspective from people who aren't living inside my head. After those 3 days of tortured thought, I talked to James. I told him I would give our marriage another chance, that we would go to counseling, that we would try to rebuild. I didn't tell him about Marcus. I couldn't. How could I demand complete honesty from him while hiding my own betrayal? But I also couldn't bring myself to confess, not when he was being so vulnerable, so genuine in his desire to make things right. We started seeing a marriage counselor. Dr. Martinez is her name, a woman in her 50s who specializes in couples recovering from infidelity. The sessions are intense, painful, productive. James is showing up in ways he hasn't in years. He's talking about his feelings, asking about mine, actually listening when I speak. He's been affectionate, thoughtful, present. He comes home from work now and asks about my day. He's noticed my paintings and told me they're beautiful. He suggested we take a trip together, just the two of us, something we haven't done in over a decade. And it's working, sort of. I can feel something shifting between us, something that might be the foundation of a renewed partnership. Our children are thrilled. Emily called me crying with happiness when James told them we were working on our marriage. Our son Michael said he'd been worried about us for years and was so relieved we were finally addressing things. Our youngest, Sarah, said she never stopped believing we'd find our way back to each other. But I still think about Marcus every single day, every single hour. I see him at art class twice a week, and it's torture. We maintain professional distance, but I can see the questions in his eyes, the hurt, the hope, the waiting. He hasn't pushed me, hasn't demanded answers, but I know I can't keep him in limbo forever. It's not fair to him. 3 weeks ago, Marcus asked if we could talk privately after class. We sat in his studio, surrounded by paintings and the smell of turpentine and possibility, and he held both my hands and said, "Catherine, I love you. I know this is complicated. I know you have decades of history with James and children and a whole life built together. But I love you, and I think you love me too. And I need to know if there's any chance for us. Because if there's not, I need to start letting you go, and I don't know if I can do that while still seeing you twice a week." I wanted to tell him I loved him too, because I do. Differently than I loved James in our early years, but maybe even more deeply because it's built on really seeing each other, on mutual respect and genuine connection. Instead, I told him I needed more time, and I watched his face fall, even as he nodded and said he'd wait as long as he could. Then last week, James surprised me with tickets to Hawaii. 2 weeks on Maui, the vacation we'd talked about taking for our 25th anniversary but never did. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to show you that I'm serious about us, about making up for lost time, about making you happy." He looked so hopeful, so vulnerable, so much like the man I'd fallen in love with 40 years ago, before life and routine and complacency had eroded everything we'd built. Make sure you're subscribed because I'm about to ask you the question that keeps me up every single night, and I genuinely need your input. Here's where I am right now, today, at this very moment. I'm 63 years old. I've been married to James for 38 years. We have 3 adult children, 5 grandchildren, a home, a life, decades of shared history. He betrayed me with a 2-year affair, yes, but he's genuinely remorseful and actively working to repair our marriage. The counseling is helping. I can see him trying, really trying, in ways he hasn't in decades. There's a path forward here, a path to restoring what we once had, or maybe building something new on the foundation of what we've learned. But then there's Marcus, 47 years old, divorced, passionate, creative, someone who makes me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. He sees me not as a wife or a mother or a grandmother, but as Catherine, a whole complex person worthy of love and desire and partnership. With Marcus, I laugh more, create more, feel more. But choosing him means blowing up my entire life. It means admitting my own affair to James right when he's trying so hard to make amends for his. It means facing my children's disappointment and anger. It means starting over at an age when most people are planning retirement, not new relationships. It means leaving security for uncertainty, and I'd be lying if I said that didn't terrify me. The Hawaii trip is in 2 weeks. Marcus has asked me to give him an answer before the end of the month. My counselor says I need to be honest with James about my own betrayal if we're going to have any chance at genuine reconciliation. My friend Eleanor, who knows everything, says I deserve to choose happiness over obligation. My daughter Emily, who knows nothing about Marcus, keeps telling me how happy she is that Dad and I are working things out. I feel like I'm being torn in two. Some days I wake up convinced that I should honor my marriage vows, that James and I can rebuild something meaningful, that choosing stability and history at this stage of life is the wise, mature decision. Other days I wake up aching for Marcus, for the passion and recognition and authentic connection we share, feeling like if I don't choose him, I'll be settling for a life half-lived, letting fear keep me from the happiness I've finally found. And here's what makes it even more complicated. I genuinely care about both of them. This isn't about good versus evil or right versus wrong. James isn't a villain. He's a flawed man who made terrible mistakes but is genuinely trying to do better. Marcus isn't perfect either. Choosing him means upheaval and uncertainty and hurting people I love. There's no clean answer here, no choice that doesn't involve pain and loss. Please, please subscribe and share this story, because I need to hear from people who aren't emotionally invested in my decision. I need perspective. So I'm asking you, everyone listening to this story, what would you do if you were me? Would you choose the security of a marriage that might be repairable? Honor the vows you made decades ago? Give your husband the second chance he's asking for? Would you think about your children and grandchildren, about the family unit you'd be breaking apart, about the life you've built over nearly 4 decades? Or would you choose the passion, the connection, the feeling of being truly seen and valued for the first time in decades? Would you say that life is too short to settle for anything less than being cherished, that you deserve happiness even if it comes with upheaval, that being authentic is worth the cost? Would you risk everything familiar for the possibility of real love at 63? I sit with this question every single day. When I'm in counseling with James, working through our issues, seeing him vulnerable and committed, I think I should stay. When I see my paintings, the ones I created because Marcus helped me rediscover that part of myself, I think I should go. When my grandchildren FaceTime me and James together, looking so happy that Grandma and Grandpa are back together, I feel the weight of obligation. When I'm alone at night and I remember what it feels like to be held by someone who chose me freely, not out of duty, I feel the pull of possibility. Marcus told me last week, "Catherine, whatever you decide, I'll accept. But I want you to know that I see a future with you. Not just stolen moments, but a real life. Traveling together, creating art together, building something genuine. I know it's scary. I know it's complicated. But I also know that we deserve to be happy, and together we are." James told me this morning, over coffee, "Catherine, I know I can't undo the past. I know I hurt you deeply, long before my affair, just by taking you for granted and shutting you out. But I want the chance to spend whatever years we have left making it up to you. We built this life together. Let's rebuild it better." If you've made it this far in my story, thank you. Thank you for listening, for not judging, for trying to understand how a woman gets to this point. Please subscribe, leave a comment, tell me what you would do in my shoes. Would you choose history or possibility? Security or passion? Obligation or authenticity? I have 2 weeks until Hawaii. I have less than a week until I need to give Marcus an answer. And I honestly don't know which choice will lead to happiness and which will lead to regret. I don't know if I'm supposed to honor the woman I was for 38 years or embrace the woman I've discovered I still am. I don't know if staying is courage or cowardice, if leaving is bravery or selfishness. All I know is that at 63, I sat alone in silence for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be truly alive. And now I feel everything, all at once. And I have to choose which life I'm going to live for whatever time I have left. So please, tell me, what would you do if you were me? How do I choose? And how do I live with whichever choice I make? Subscribe, comment, Share this with someone who might understand. Because right now, I need all the wisdom I can get. And whatever I decide, I'll come back and tell you what happened next. I promise. But first, I need to know. Am I crazy for even considering leaving? Am I terrible for staying while still thinking about Marcus? Is there a right answer here, or am I doomed to hurt people I care about no matter what I choose? The clock is ticking. My heart is breaking in two different directions. And I'm asking you, genuinely asking you, to help me find my way through this impossible choice. What would you do in my place?